There is a particular kind of silence that follows the moment you realize you were never who you thought you were to the people you love. Not the silence of an empty room, not the silence of a bad night, the silence of understanding, complete, irreversible understanding that the relationship you thought existed and the relationship that actually existed are two entirely different things. I have lived in that silence for 2 years now, and I want to tell you about the evening that put me there. For a second, it was a Friday night in October. My house, my gathering, I had organized it, bought the food, cleaned for 2 days, set out the candles and the good glasses the way you do when you want the people you love to feel at home in your space. 12 people around my dining table and in my living room, people I had known for years. People I had shown up for in the ways that matter, hospital visits and moving days and the 2 a.m. phone calls that real friendship is made of. I stepped into the hallway to get more wine from the kitchen, and I heard my name, not called, spoken in the particular lower tone of someone who is talking about a person who is not in the room. I stopped and I listened. And in the 3 minutes that followed, I heard things that I cannot unknown, things that rearranged quietly and completely and permanently my understanding of who I was to the people I had spent years believing were my people. This is the story of those 3 minutes, and of everything, the silence, the grief, the fury, and finally, the extraordinary clean air of a life rebuilt on truth rather than performance that came after them. My name is Caroline. I am 38 years old and I live in Portland, Oregon, which is a city I moved to at 23 for a job I no longer have and stayed in for a life I was building with the people I met there. I want to describe, before I describe what I lost, what I thought I had, because the loss only makes sense when you understand the fullness of what I believe was there. My closest friend, my best friend of 11 years, was a woman named Jessica. We had met at the marketing firm where I worked in my mid-20s. She was sharp and funny and the kind of person who made a room feel like a party without particularly trying. We had bonded in the way of people who spend enough time together in close quarters, overshared complaints about the office and then, gradually, over everything that actually mattered. Her divorce, my mother's illness. The kind of conversations that start over coffee and end 2 hours later with the particular intimacy of having said more than you meant to and not regretted it.
I trusted Jessica the way I trusted very few people, completely. The way you trust someone when you have shown them your actual self, the version beneath the polished, socially functional version, and they have not run. Then there was my sister, Rebecca, 3 years older, the sibling I had navigated my entire life alongside, through a childhood that had its difficult patches and an adulthood that had required us to consciously choose each other rather than simply defaulting to family obligation.
I thought we had made that choice. I thought we had arrived, after some complicated years in our 20s, at a genuine friendship rather than just a biological one. And there were others in that circle, Marcus and his wife Diane, who had been part of the group for 7 years. My friend Tonya, who I had met through a book club, and who had become one of those people you cannot imagine not having known. People who came to my house and ate my food and told me their problems and received mine in return. I was, within that group, the organizer, The one who remembered birthdays and suggested the dinners and followed up when someone went quiet. I was the one who noticed, who always noticed when someone needed something, and who provided it without waiting to be asked. I had always thought of this as simply who I was. I had not understood until that October Friday that some of them had a different word for it entirely. It was Jessica's voice I heard first. I recognized it immediately. 11 years of knowing someone's voice means you know it at any volume, through any door, in any configuration of background noise. She was in the kitchen, which was around the corner from where I stood in the hallway. The door was not fully closed. She was speaking to Rebecca. I know this because I heard Rebecca laugh, her particular laugh, the short, sharp one that means she finds something genuinely amusing rather than the longer social one she uses when she is performing enjoyment for a room. I know my sister's laughs. I have known them my entire life. I stood in the hallway and I did not move. I want to be honest about this. I knew I should move. I knew that continuing to stand there was a choice, that whatever I was about to hear was going to change something, and that choosing to hear it was choosing that change. I understood that in the moment. I stayed anyway because something in me, some quiet, persistent instinct that I had been silencing for longer than I knew, had been waiting for permission to hear the truth. And this was as close to permission as I was going to get. Jessica said, I love her, but she is so much sometimes. You know what I mean? She turns every gathering into a production. It's always about what Caroline organized, what Caroline planned, what Caroline thinks everyone needs. Rebecca said, she means well. Jessica said, I know she means well. That's what makes it exhausting. You can't say anything because she means well and she tries so hard. And if you ever said anything, she would fall apart. She has no idea how much she talks about herself. There was a pause. And then Rebecca said, and this is the sentence I have returned to most in the 2 years since, the one that landed deepest, the one that came from the person I had least expected it from. Honestly, sometimes I dread these things. I calm because she needs us to calm, but it is a lot. It has always been a lot. 6 seconds, I stood in that hallway for what felt like a very long time, and then I heard Marcus's voice joining them in the kitchen. And I heard him say, is she still in the living room? And Rebecca said, I think so. And I straightened up and I adjusted my expression into the one that had been in my repertoire for my entire life, the pleasant, easy, slightly distracted expression of a person who has not heard anything and has no idea that anything was said. The expression that asks nothing of anyone and gives nothing away. And I walked into the kitchen and I picked up the bottle of wine and I said, who needs a top up? And they all smiled at me and I smiled back and I went back to the living room and I hosted my gathering until 11:30 at night with every ounce of warmth and generosity I had ever had, and I never said a single word about what I had heard. 9 o'clock, 12:30, Act 3, the days that followed. The night after everyone left, I sat on my kitchen floor, not in dramatic collapse. I simply found myself there, sitting with my back against a cabinet beneath the sink, the way I had sometimes sat as a child when I needed to be very close to the ground, and I thought about what I had heard with as much clarity and honesty as I could manage. I thought about Jessica, about 11 years of friendship, and whether, looking back with the new information I now carried, I could identify the seams in it. The moments where the warmth had been slyly performed, where her advice, which I had always taken as coming from a place of genuine care, might have carried within it a needle of something I had not recognized as judgment at the time. And I could find them. That was the difficult thing. Once you know something, the evidence for it is suddenly everywhere. Comment I had absorbed as gentle teasing, a particular tone in certain conversation that I had explained to myself as Jessica being tired or stressed, but that I now understood as the voice of someone who found me, in her honest private moments, too much. I thought about Rebecca. This was harder, because a friend you can release from your life, painfully but cleanly. A sister is something else. A sister is your entire childhood. She is the person who knows the things that predate your adult self, who carries the history of who you were before you had any choice about who you were going to be. To revise your understanding of your sister is to revise your understanding of your past. Had I been genuinely too much? I sat with that question on the kitchen floor and I tried to answer it honestly. Here is what I concluded. Yes and no. Yes, I was by nature a person who organized, who planned, and who held the group together through the sheer force of consistent showing up. And yes, that quality in a person can feel like pressure to the people around them even when no pressure is intended. But no, because the solution to that between people who genuinely love each other was a conversation. A gentle, honest conversation that said, sometimes I need less. Can we find a balance? Not a decade of kitchen conversations while I refill the wine glasses in the next room. The issue was not that I was too much. The issue was that I had never been given the respect of honesty. They had chosen the comfort of talking about me over the discomfort of talking to me. And I had been the person who made that comfortable for them by being so reliably, uncomplainingly present that there were never any consequences to the way they treated me when I wasn't looking. I want to tell you clearly what I did not do. I did not send a long message. I did not call Jessica or Rebecca to confront them with what I had heard. I did not gather the group and perform the scene that part of me, the hurt, furious part, had composed in the days after the party with great precision and not a little satisfaction. I had watched people do that. I had seen the aftermath of those confrontations, the denials, the deflections, the reframing of what was said and how it was meant, the exhausting theater of a group of people defending themselves against an accusation they knew to be true. I had no interest in spending my emotional energy on a performance that would leave me feeling worse rather than better. What I did instead was something that felt at first like nothing. I simply stopped. I stopped organizing the gatherings. I stopped being the one who remembered the birthdays and followed up when someone went quiet. I stopped making myself available at hours that were inconvenient for me, but convenient for them. I stopped being the reliable, inexhaustible Caroline whose presence could be assumed because she had never, in 11 years of friendship and a lifetime of sisterhood, given anyone reason to believe she might not show up. I did not announce this. I did not explain it. I simply made myself, gradually and without drama, less central. And I watched what happened. What happened was instructive. Jessica texted, after 2 weeks, asking if I was okay, not out of genuine concern, I had come to understand, but because my absence was a disruption to the functioning of the group. She was used to me filling a particular role, and the role was now unfilled, and she could feel it. I replied that I was fine and I was just busy, and I asked how she was, and the conversation moved on. Rebecca called after 3 weeks, a real call, which was unusual enough that I almost didn't pick up. She asked if I was coming to the family dinner that Sunday. I said I had other plans. She accepted that without pushing, and the call was short. I noticed something in that short call. She did not ask if I was okay, she asked if I was coming. The difference between those two questions, the difference between caring about a person and caring about what a person provides, was in that moment completely clear to me. So I continued. I put back further, politely, undramatic ally without burning anything. I was never cold, I was never rude. I simply became a person who was less available and less central and less responsible for the smooth functioning of everyone else's social lives. And I spent the time I recovered from that withdrawal on something I had been neglecting for years: myself. The year that followed was the strangest year of my adult life. Strange because it was, in many ways, lonely. The group had been my primary social world for nearly a decade, and withdrawing from it left a genuine gap that I had to sit with rather than immediately fill. I was not going to replace it by curating a new set of people to organize and show up for and carry. I had learned something about that pattern that I needed time to fully understand before I repeated it. So I sat with the loneliness, and I found after a few months that it was not as frightening as I had anticipated. There were good things in that space. I took up running not because anyone suggested it, not because it was something that belonged to my social identity, but because I wanted to. I ran alone early in the mornings through the neighborhood that I had lived in for 15 years and never fully paid attention to. I noticed things: the particular way the light came through the trees in early November, a bakery I had walked past 100 times without stopping, a bench beside a small pond where I sometimes sat and watched the water and thought about nothing in particular. I read more. I cooked for myself with the same attention I had always given to cooking for others, and I discovered that it tasted different when it was made purely for me. Not better, not worse, just more honest somehow. I made one new friend in those months. Her name was Lydia, a woman I had met at a weekend hiking group I had joined purely on impulse one Saturday morning. She was quiet and dry and had no interest in organizing anything or being organized. We had coffee after a hike and talked for 2 hours, and the conversation required no management from either of us. It simply happened easily in the way that real things do when they are not being performed. I told her eventually about the hallway. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "That sounds like it cost you a lot." I said it had. She said, "I think the people who give the most are often the least protected, because everyone assumes they're fine, they seem fine. They make everything fine for everyone else and nobody thinks to ask if they need the same back." I have thought about that often since. As for Jessica and Rebecca, I see them still. Occasionally, we are cordial. The warmth between us is a different temperature now than it was before the hallway, and I think all three of us know it, though none of us has said so. I am okay with that. I had rather have the truth at a cooler temperature than the performance at a warmer one. The karma in this story did not arrive as a single dramatic event. It arrived the way most real karma does, gradually, in the form of natural consequences that nobody orchestrated. Without me holding the group together, the gatherings became less frequent and eventually stopped. This was not something I had intended or engineered. It was simply what happened when the person who had been doing the invisible labor of maintaining a social world stopped doing it. The group had not been self-sustaining. It had been sustained by me all along, and in my absence it did what structures do when their foundations are quietly removed. Jessica and Rebecca fell out the following year over something I was not part of and do not know the full details of. I know this because Tanya, who had remained genuinely kind throughout all of it, mentioned it to me once. She said Jessica had felt that Rebecca hadn't shown up for her when she needed someone, that Jessica had been surprised by how quickly Rebecca had made herself unavailable. I listened to that, and I did not say what I thought, but I thought it. I thought, now you know what it feels like to give and give and give and then hear through a half-open door that the giving was received as too much rather than as what it was, which was love, which was always entirely only love. Karma does not require your assistance. It does not need you to engineer it or announce it or wait for it with visible anticipation. It simply requires time. And time, as I have said, is very patient. Here is what I know now that I did not know before that October Friday. The most important relationships in your life are not the ones in which someone is always there. They are the ones in which someone is genuinely there, present, honest. The ones that do not require you to perform a version of yourself that is slightly adjusted to make the other person comfortable. The ones that can survive the truth of who you actually are in all your actual complexity without retreating to the kitchen to discuss you over lowered voices. If you are the person in your group who organizes, who shows up, who holds things together, I see you. And I want to say something to you very plainly. Your value is not in your usefulness. The people who are worth keeping in your life are the ones who would come to your kitchen floor at midnight if you called them. Not the ones who come to your parties because you organize them so well that not coming would be socially awkward. Learn the difference. It is one of the most important things you will ever learn. And if you have a half-open door in your life, a relationship where something doesn't quite add up, where the warmth feels slightly performed, where you have the quiet, persistent feeling that the conversation changes when you leave the room, trust that feeling. You don't always have to open the door fully to know what's behind it. Sometimes it is enough to simply stop standing in the hallway, to walk toward the people who have never made you listen through a door to find out if they love you. Those people exist. I found one on a hiking trail on a Saturday morning, and she has never once made me wonder what she says when I am not in the room. This has been Soul Tales. My name is Caroline, and somewhere on a bench beside a small pond on an early morning in November, I finally heard the only voice that had never lied to me, my own.